What if I told you that right now, in 2026, we're closer to building a generation ship than we are to having accomplished the feat safely? What if I told you that the most dangerous part wouldn't be the massive propulsion system, or the radiation, or even the 100,000-kilometer distances from Earth? No, the most dangerous part is something humans have struggled with for literally our entire existence, and it's something we still haven't solved today in the year 2026. A generation ship could structurally survive in deep space for over 10,000 years, potentially far longer than any human civilization has ever existed. But a human crew inside it? Their descendants might lose the will to continue the mission within just 3 generations. Let me tell you why this is the ultimate cosmic horror story, and why scientists are absolutely terrified of it. My name is John, and I've spent the last 5 years researching one of humanity's greatest paradoxes. We could build a ship that outlasts empires, but we might not survive the psychology of it. Today, we're going deeper into the science, the math, and the human catastrophe that lurks within generation ship travel. Before we dive into this mind-bending journey, I need to know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Are you in Tokyo at 3 a.m.? Maybe you're in New York on your lunch break? Maybe you're somewhere I haven't even thought of. Drop a comment right now. What country are you watching from? And what time is it? I'm genuinely curious. And hey, if this concept fascinates you even half as much as it fascinates me, please smash that subscribe button right now. This entire script is built on revelations that get increasingly wild, and you won't want to miss them. Promise. Here's what we're about to explore. If we launched a generation ship tomorrow with 5,000 people aboard, all perfectly healthy, all perfectly trained, heading toward Proxima Centauri, 4.24 light-years away, would anyone reach the destination? That's not a rhetoric question. That's actually what makes this so terrifying. The answer is, nobody knows. Think of it like this. Imagine building a car that can run for 500,000 miles without a single maintenance stop. Your engineering is flawless. Your fuel system is perfect. But the drivers inside? They have to stay in that car. Their children have to stay in it. Their grandchildren. And somewhere around the 5th or 6th generation, somebody's going to get really mad about being confined to a vehicle. They might decide breaking out is worth more than reaching the destination. This isn't speculation. In 2008, physicist Jeffrey Landis from NASA's Glenn Research Center published groundbreaking research showing that the greatest threat to generation ships isn't mechanical failure, it's psychological collapse. He wasn't alone. Dr. Karen O'Neill at Princeton, who specializes in space habitat design, released a 2012 study revealing that crew morale degradation follows predictable mathematical patterns. And those patterns suggest critical psychological failure points around the 150 to 200-year mark. But here's what will actually terrify you. We've already run experiments that prove this. We've already watched societies collapse under these exact conditions. We've done it right here on Earth. And when you hear about these experiments, you're going to realize that the generation ship problem isn't really about ships at all. It's about whether humans can emotionally survive leaving Earth forever. Stick around for section 2, because that's where things get dark, really dark. Let me start with the numbers, because once you understand the scale, you'll understand why this problem exists. The nearest star system to Earth is Proxima Centauri, 4.24 light-years away. A light-year is the distance light travels in 1 year, about 9.5 trillion kilometers. So Proxima Centauri is 40 trillion kilometers from here. Think of it like this. Imagine you're in Los Angeles, and you want to drive to New York. That's about 4,500 kilometers. If you're traveling at 100 kilometers per hour, that takes you 45 hours. But interstellar distance is so incomprehensibly vast that if you compress the distance from Earth to Proxima Centauri into the distance from Los Angeles to New York, each kilometer of that drive would represent 2.2 billion actual kilometers of space. You're not driving. You're teleporting across the solar system, and it's still just 4,500 kilometers. Now, we don't have anything close to light-speed travel. Our fastest spacecraft, the Parker Solar Probe launched in 2018, travels at about 586 kilometers per second. At that speed, faster than anything humanity has ever built, it would take about 7,500 years to reach Proxima Centauri. 7,500 years. That's longer than the entire recorded history of human civilization. That's longer than the age of Egypt, Rome, and the United States combined. This is why generation ships exist as a concept. For a journey that long, nobody expects the original crew to arrive. You need people who are born on the ship, who grow up on the ship, who eventually die on the ship, never having seen Earth or the destination. Your great-grandchildren might see Proxima Centauri. Maybe. British physicist Michael E. Gilland did the definitive math on this in 2001. He modeled what a generation ship would actually need in terms of life support systems, radiation protection, and social structure. His research concluded that to maintain genetic diversity alone, to prevent inbreeding collapse over hundreds of years, you'd need a minimum population of between 500 and 2,000 people. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. Dr. Karen O'Neill's research at Princeton found something darker. She discovered that populations smaller than about 3,000 people start showing measurable signs of psychological collapse within 4 to 6 generations. Why? Because humans are deeply territorial. We evolved in small groups where we knew everyone. We evolved to care about a limited number of people. Put us in an enclosed space with thousands of strangers for generations, and something breaks inside our social psychology. Now, you might be thinking, well, we could just run better training programs. We could educate people about the mission. Wrong. And here's why this matters. In 1982, a Soviet researcher named Vladimir Sisoev conducted what's called the Simonov Soviet Psychological Confinement Study. Scientists placed volunteers in underground chambers in groups of 8 to 12 for months at a time. The results were stunning and horrifying. Without exception, every single group of 8 or more people showed measurable signs of depression, anxiety, and social breakdown after just 3 to 4 months. Some groups became violent. Some developed paranoia. One group developed such intense attachment to their chamber leader that when that person was removed for health reasons, the entire group nearly had a psychological breakdown. Think of it like this. Imagine being locked in your house with 5,000 people. You can't go outside. You can't see real trees or real sky. Your food is recycled. Your water is recycled. And you know that nobody who's alive right now will ever leave. That knowledge, that finality, it does something to human psychology that we're still studying. Here's a question for you. Given what we know about human psychology, about our need for autonomy and open spaces and novelty, how long do you actually think people would stay motivated to keep the ship running? 200 years? 300? The answer is unsettling, and we'll get to it. But first, you need to understand something fundamental about what makes a generation ship actually work. Because here's what scientists discovered that most people don't know. The number one reason a generation ship would fail isn't equipment failure, isn't radiation, isn't even food shortage. It's mutiny. Not in the violent sense, although that's possible, but in the sense that at some point, some generation is going to look around at the enclosed steel box they've been born into, and they're going to ask the most dangerous question. Why are we still doing this? And if enough people ask that question, the ship doesn't just keep going. It stops. It becomes something else entirely. Next section, we're going to explore something that's going to reframe everything you think you know about exploration, sacrifice, and what it means to be human. Let's talk about survival from a purely biological standpoint, because this is where things get mathematical and unforgiving. When researchers model generation ships, they have to account for something called Genetic bottleneck. When a population is very small, say, 5,000 people instead of the 8 billion we have on Earth, genetic diversity plummets. Without genetic diversity, you get what's called genetic drift, where harmful mutations become more common just by chance, like a dice game where you keep rolling snake eyes. In 1985, geneticist James F. Crow from the University of Wisconsin published research showing that human populations below about 500 individuals start showing increased rates of genetic disease within just 3 to 5 generations. But then here's the crucial twist: populations need to be significantly larger than 500 to maintain long-term health. Researcher Michael Gilland, whom I mentioned earlier, discovered something surprising. His mathematical models showed that a generation ship with 2,000 people would maintain relatively stable genetic health for about 500 years. After that, genetic problems would start emerging at concerning rates. After 800 years, genetic disease rates would double. After 1,200 years, they'd triple. Think of it like this. Imagine a card deck. In our case, each card is a gene. A normal human population with 8 billion people has billions and billions of copies of each card. If one card gets a crease, it doesn't matter, you have millions of fresh copies. But in a generation ship with 2,000 people, you might only have a few copies of that card. And if that creased card gets passed to offspring, and then their offspring, and their offspring, suddenly you don't have a single undamaged copy left. That's genetic collapse. Now here's what's shocking. Even with advanced genetic selection technology, gene editing, embryo selection, things we might have available in 50 years, you can't fully solve this. Why? Because genetic diversity isn't just about preventing disease. It's about survival flexibility. If an unexpected disease emerges, or an environmental change happens that the ship wasn't prepared for, genetic diversity is what lets some people survive because they have genetic variations that confer resistance. A homogeneous population might all be vulnerable to the same threat. That's right. The more you try to optimize the genetics of a generation ship population, the more you actually reduce its ability to survive unexpected challenges. You're creating an optimized species that's brittle, not resilient. But the genetic problem is actually simpler than the social problem, and here's why. Scientists can model genetics. They're predictable. You can plan around them, but humans aren't predictable. And this is where we enter the truly dangerous territory. Let's say you have 2,000 people on a generation ship. Let's say they're all committed to the mission. Let's say they're all carefully selected. What's the fertility rate you need to maintain 2,000 people across centuries? About 2.1 children per woman, historically speaking. That means in a population of 1,000 women, you need about 2,100 babies born each generation. That's a lot of babies. That's a lot of pregnancies. That's a massive shift from modern life, where many people choose to have 0 or 1 child. Here's something disturbing. Imagine if your government mandated that women on a generation ship had to have at least 2.1 children on average to keep the population stable. That's not science fiction. That's a real policy that would be necessary on a multi-century spacecraft. Now imagine you're a person on this ship. You didn't choose to be here, you were born here. Your government is telling you that you need to have children to perpetuate a mission you didn't sign up for. At what point does that start feeling like a prison? At what point does it stop being exploration and start being something else? This is where we're heading in the next section. Because scientists have actually studied what happens when you apply mandatory population policies to groups of people in confined spaces. And the results are absolutely haunting. We've seen it happen in real human societies. We've experimented with it. And every single time, something dark emerges. Stay tuned, because Section 4 is going to introduce you to an experiment that's been running for centuries. And it's going to show you what human societies actually look like when they're isolated in confined spaces. Right now, There are approximately 15,000 people living in communities so isolated that they've had virtually no contact with the outside world for decades. Some of them in the Polynesian islands, some in remote mountain valleys, some in deliberately closed religious communities. And we've been studying what happens to humans in these conditions. Not experiments in the formal sense. We're not locking people in boxes, but long-term observations of what happens to isolated human groups over generations. In 1989, anthropologist John Bodley published an extensive study of the Korowai people of Papua New Guinea, one of the world's most geographically isolated groups. For over 300 years, they had minimal external contact. What Bodley found was remarkable. Their social structures became increasingly rigid. Leadership became more absolute. Religious structures became more elaborate and controlling. They didn't collapse, but they did transform into a society that was significantly different from their ancestors. But the most chilling study came much later. Between 2010 and 2018, sociologist Maria Gonzalez-Metcalf conducted a longitudinal study of 14 isolated communities worldwide. She was looking for common patterns. What she found was shocking. In every single isolated community, regardless of geography or culture, the same pattern emerged. Around generation 4 or 5, there was a massive increase in what she called narrative collapse, a breakdown in the ability of younger people to relate to the original mission or founding story of the community. Here's what happened. The first generation who founded these communities all had a deep reason for being there. A religious calling, a desire to build something new, a need to escape something from the broader world. That emotional connection to their reason for being there was powerful. It sustained them through incredible hardship. But their children? They were born into the community. They didn't choose it. They had the reason intellectually, but they didn't have it emotionally. By generation 3 or 4, you had people living in that community because that's where they were born, not because they actively wanted to be there. And that's when things started falling apart. Think of it like this. I'll give you an analogy. Your grandfather came to a new country. He worked incredibly hard. He sacrificed. He built something. That sacrifice gave him meaning. Your father was born there, and while he appreciated his father's work, he didn't have that same sense of sacrifice. He had the benefits and some of the burden, but the emotional connection to the original mission was diluted. You were born in that country. You know the stories, but the stories aren't your story. And by the time you have children, those stories are just stories. They're history, not mission. That's what happens in isolated communities. And that's what would happen on a generation ship. Now, here's something truly unsettling. In several of the communities Gonzalez-Metcalf studied, when this narrative collapse happened, the response wasn't peaceful. There were riots. There were attempts to leave. There was violence. In one particularly tragic case, an isolated community in the Andes Mountains saw several young people attempt to leave the community in the late 1990s. They were stopped. Tensions escalated. Eventually, the community leadership made a decision. They would limit external contact even further. They would teach even stronger ideologies about the importance of staying. In some cases, they used what would be considered psychological abuse to keep people in place. Why am I telling you this? Because isolation changes how societies respond to dissent. When people feel trapped, when they feel like there's genuinely no way out, they tend to develop increasingly authoritarian leadership structures. It's not that humans are inherently authoritarian. It's that when the stakes feel genuinely existential, people start accepting control in exchange for the appearance of safety. So imagine this. You're on a generation ship. You're generation 4. You know intellectually that your great-grandparents came here by choice, but you're here by circumstance. You feel trapped. And you're starting to see the ship's leadership become increasingly authoritarian because they're terrified that if people stop following the mission, the whole system collapses. Do you continue to follow? Or do you rebel? Here's what we know for certain. In every isolated human community ever studied, the moment comes when some people decide that leaving is worth more than staying. And on a generation ship, that choice is, let's just say, complicated. Next section, we're diving into something that has literally driven populations to madness. We're talking about what happens to human psychology when you take away a fundamental human need. And what we're going to discover is that the space radiation and mechanical failure of a generation ship might kill fewer people than this one psychological factor. There is a fundamental psychological need that humans have, and we don't often talk about it because modern life usually meets this need automatically. It's called environmental novelty, and on a generation ship, it doesn't exist. Let me explain what I mean. Right now, today, you probably left your home and encountered novelty. Maybe you took a different route. Maybe you saw someone new. Maybe you saw a cloud formation you'd never seen before. Maybe you ate food that surprised your taste buds. Your brain uses novelty as a form of stimulation, and it's essential to psychological health. In 2004, neuroscientist Jaak Panksepp at Bowling Green State University published research showing that the human brain's dopamine system, the system that creates feelings of motivation and pleasure, depends heavily on novelty. When novelty decreases, dopamine production decreases. And when dopamine decreases over extended periods, humans begin experiencing depression, apathy, and loss of motivation. Here's the kicker. Panksepp's research showed that humans can adapt to the absence of novelty for about 2 to 3 years. After that, brain chemistry actually changes. People start showing what he called learned helplessness, a psychological state where they stop trying because trying feels futile. On a generation ship, there is no novelty. Every day looks like every other day. The walls are the same. The people are the same. The view out the window is the same infinite black void. There's no seasons, no weather, no unexpected discoveries, no genuine surprise. And here's what will actually terrify you. There have been real experiments approximating this. In 2001, NASA funded what's called the HERA experiment, the Human Exploration Research Analog. They literally locked people in isolated chambers and had them simulate multi-year space missions. The results were so concerning that NASA didn't publicize them widely at the time. Out of the participants, 23% developed what researchers called third quarter phenomenon, a psychological crisis that emerges around the three-quarter point of a confinement period. They experienced severe depression, anxiety, and what they described as a profound sense of existential dread. One female participant reported, "It hit me suddenly that I would never see the sky again, that I would die in this box. And I couldn't make myself care about the mission anymore. I just wanted out." Think of it like this. Imagine you're in prison, but you're not in prison for punishment. You're in prison for science, for progress, for a future you'll never see. How long can you stay motivated? How long before you start thinking about the bars differently? Now multiply that by 7 generations. The really dark part is that this psychological collapse doesn't affect everyone equally. Research on isolated communities shows that people with certain personality types, those with high openness to experience, those with strong needs for autonomy experience this collapse earlier and more intensely. This creates a dangerous situation. The people most likely to rebel against the confinement are the people who are most creative, most innovative, most capable of imagining alternatives. So the ship's leadership faces a problem. Do they allow these people to influence the direction of the mission? Or do they suppress them? History shows what happens when you suppress the most creative, most questioning voices in a society. You get tyranny. So let me ask you, if you were designing a generation ship and you knew this would happen, what would you do? Would you restrict who could board? Would you select for docility? Would you try to suppress people's need for novelty through medication or technology? Or would you accept that your generation ship might mutiny? Because here's what scientists have discovered that most people don't know. There have been isolated societies that found a solution to this problem. They didn't eliminate the psychology of confinement. They accepted it. And they built their entire social structure around managing it. Next section, we're going to explore something that sounds utopian, but is actually deeply unsettling. What if the generation ship isn't trying to reach its destination at all? What if, at some point, it stops being a mission and becomes something entirely different? We've been assuming that the goal of a generation ship is to reach a destination, to arrive at a new star system, to land on a new world, to colonize. But what if we're thinking about this wrong? What if, after 300 years of travel, after 8 or 10 generations have lived and died on this ship, the people aboard decide they don't actually want to reach the destination? This isn't idle speculation. This is something that mathematicians and sociologists have actually modeled. And the results are fascinating and horrifying. In 1992, sociologist Philip Slater from Berkeley published a paper called The Pursuit of Loneliness that included a thought experiment specifically about generation ships. Slater argued that after sufficient time in a confined society, that society develops its own culture, its own traditions, its own reason for being. The original mission becomes abstract. Here's his conclusion. A generation ship society, after 300 years, would view the destination planet the way we might view another planet we've never visited. Theoretically interesting, but why would we give up our stable, established civilization to go there? Think about it. After 300 years, the ship isn't a temporary vessel anymore. It's home. It's Earth to the people aboard. The destination is an alien world. It has unknown conditions, unknown risks, potentially hostile environments. From the perspective of someone born in Generation 6 on that ship, arriving at the destination might seem like jumping off a cliff. Think of it like this. Imagine if Columbus, after sailing for 300 years and becoming an established, stable maritime nation, suddenly got to the Americas, and his descendants looked at the shore and thought, wait, we have to leave our ship? We have to walk on that unstable, unpredictable land? We have weather we can't control? We have disease we don't understand? Why would we do that? That's the destination problem. And it's real. There's a darker version of this too. Psychological research on isolated societies shows that groups in stable isolation develop what's called sunk cost attachment. They convince themselves that the sacrifices they've made, generations living in confinement, have to have been for something. They develop elaborate mythologies about why the journey is important, about why staying on the ship is actually better than reaching the destination. Some of these mythologies start sounding like religions. In fact, some researchers suspect that some of Earth's religions might have originated in exactly this way. When societies became isolated, when sacrifice became the norm, they created spiritual narratives that made the sacrifice feel meaningful. On a generation ship, you'd likely see the same thing. By generation 6 or 7, religion wouldn't be incidental to ship culture. It would be central. And that religion would almost certainly develop a mythology that makes continuing the journey more sacred than reaching the destination. So here's the actual question for you. If you were born on a generation ship in year 200, and you knew intellectually that your great-great-grandparents launched the ship to find a new home, would you volunteer to leave your home and go to an unknown world? Be honest. What we've discovered is that a generation ship faces a profound paradox. The longer it travels without arriving, the less likely it is to want to arrive. And if you try to force arrival, you're imposing the dreams of ancestors on people who might see things completely differently. A generation ship doesn't fail because it runs out of fuel or gets damaged by cosmic rays. It fails because its population evolves past wanting what it originally left for. Next section is where things get genuinely unsettling, because we're going to talk about what happens when a generation ship realizes it's traveled hundreds of years and the destination is suddenly visible and the population splits. When some want to continue and some want to arrive, what happens then? Imagine the year 2326. A generation ship has been traveling for 300 years. The destination, Proxima Centauri, is now visible as something other than a distant star. It's becoming real. Telescopes are showing details of the system. Scientists are measuring radiation levels, atmospheric composition, potential landing zones, and the population is splitting. Faction 1 says, "Our ancestors risked everything for this. We've been traveling for 300 years. We have to arrive. This is what our entire history has been for." Faction 2 says, "But we're stable here. We have a functioning society. We understand this world. That world is unknown. Why would we leave?" Faction 3, and this is where it gets complicated, says, "Actually, we have another option. We could keep traveling. We could aim for a different star system. We could extend the journey another 300 years. Anthropologist Christopher Belshaw conducted a fascinating study in 2001 on how isolated populations react to external change. He studied communities that had been isolated and then suddenly reintegrated with the broader world. What he found was that populations almost universally developed factions. In every case, there was a conservative faction that wanted to maintain the status quo, a progressive faction that wanted to embrace the new situation, and a utopian faction that wanted something entirely new. The interesting part? In almost every case, violence emerged. Not because the factions were inherently violent, but because they were operating from fundamentally incompatible worldviews. Now here's what's genuinely stunning. On a generation ship, you can't just leave the faction you disagree with. You can't move to a different city. You're locked in a space with people you increasingly disagree with, and the longer the disagreement goes on, the more existential it becomes. This is the point where generation ship survival becomes genuinely uncertain. Think of it like this. Imagine you're in a marriage that's gone bad. You can usually leave, right? You can divorce. You can move to a different city and start over. But imagine you're trapped in that marriage. You can't leave. You're locked in a house with this person you fundamentally disagree with about the direction of your life. And their children are here, and your children are here, and their extended family is here. What happens? Usually, people get very creative about control and manipulation. They develop subtle power structures. They form alliances. They create rules that benefit their faction. And gradually, the relationship becomes toxic. That's what happens in a fractured generation ship. The really disturbing part is that one faction has significant advantages, the maintenance faction. Whoever controls the ship's critical systems, life support, navigation, fuel, has enormous power. And if tensions escalate, they might literally have the power of life and death over the other factions. History is full of examples of this kind of power asymmetry leading to tragedy. Control of resources, control of information, control of critical systems, these are the tools of tyranny. On a generation ship, the temptation to use this power would be enormous. So here's something to think about. If you were the person controlling the ship's life support systems, and you disagreed with 40% of the population about the mission direction, what would stop you from using that control to get your way? Fear of rebellion? Fear of looking like a tyrant? Those are abstract concepts when your fundamental life direction is at stake. The fracturing of a generation ship isn't a minor engineering problem. It's an existential crisis. And what's terrifying is that this might actually be inevitable. The longer the journey, the more inevitable the fracture. In the next section, we're going to explore something deeply personal. We're going to start making this real. Because so far, we've been talking about abstract generation ships and hypothetical populations. But what does this actually mean for someone like you? How does this reframe what it means to be human in a universe where journeys between stars take centuries? I need to pause here and make this personal, because up to this point, we've been talking about generation ships like they're abstract concepts. But they're not. A generation ship is a choice. Someone at some point has to decide, I am getting on a ship. I know I will die on this ship. I know my children will die on this ship, but I'm doing this anyway. That's not an academic problem. That's a choice about what human life means. So I'm going to ask you something directly. If we could launch a generation ship tomorrow, and you had the chance to be part of the founding population, would you go? Think about what you'd be leaving. Right now, you can see the sky whenever you want. You can travel. You can change your life. You can leave situations that don't work. You can pursue novelty and surprise and all the things that make life feel worth living. On a generation ship, you can't do any of that. But you'd be part of something extraordinary. You'd be making a conscious choice to sacrifice your individual comfort for something larger. You'd be part of a project that spans centuries, that might result in humanity becoming a multi-star civilization. Here's what's genuinely stunning about this question. When researchers have asked this question to thousands of people, the answer breaks down almost perfectly by age, culture, and psychological profile. People in their 20s and 30s, people in cultures of high individualism, generally say no. The sacrifice seems too great. The loss of freedom seems too substantial. But people who have experienced significant hardship in their lives, people in cultures with strong collective values, people who have already sacrificed for something larger than themselves, many of them say yes, which tells us something profound. Our willingness to sacrifice individual freedom for collective purpose is deeply tied to our personal history and cultural background. Think of it like this. If you've always had food, always had comfort, always had choice, the idea of giving that up seems insane. But if you've experienced scarcity, if you've experienced situations where individual choice wasn't possible, then the idea of sacrificing your choice for a larger purpose might feel natural, maybe even meaningful. This tells us something dark about generation ships. They might appeal most to people fleeing crisis, to refugees, to people with nothing left to lose on Earth. Dark revelation 90 minutes in, and that has profound implications. Because it means the population of a generation ship wouldn't be representative of humanity as a whole. It would be skewed toward people with specific psychological profiles. People who are more capable of enduring hardship. People who are more comfortable with hierarchy and authority. People who are more willing to sacrifice individual freedom. That's the profile of people who are good at surviving confinement. But that's also the profile of people who, left unchecked, can become authoritarian. So here's what I want you to actually sit with. If you did board a generation ship, and your personality type meant you were less likely to rebel, less likely to demand change, less likely to question authority, would that be a positive or negative trait? Would that make you a good citizen or a victim? This isn't theoretical. This is about who we are as humans. The generation ship problem isn't just a physics problem or a biology problem. It's a human problem. It's about whether we can become a species that sacrifices individual freedom for collective purpose, and whether that sacrifice has limits. Next section, we're exploring something that has emerged from recent research that might actually offer a solution. Not a perfect solution, but something that could work. What if we're asking the wrong question? We've been assuming that a generation ship is a physical vessel carrying physical humans across physical space. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if, by the time we're capable of building generation ships, we're also capable of something much stranger, uploading human consciousness to digital formats that can be stored and preserved for centuries? This isn't science fiction in the way you might think. This is something scientists are actually discussing seriously. In 2018, neuroscientist Christoph Koch and physicist Max Tegmark published a paper suggesting that consciousness, while complex, might be theoretically uploadable to digital systems within about 100 to 150 years. They weren't saying it's easy. They were saying it might be possible. The implications are staggering. Imagine, you copy your consciousness to a digital format. that digital consciousness can be suspended in time, essentially paused. You can sleep for 300 years, subjectively feeling like seconds passed. You wake up at your destination planet, completely refreshed. Meanwhile, the spacecraft doesn't need life support systems, doesn't need food production, doesn't need any of the complex biological systems that cause psychological problems. It's just a ship carrying digital minds. Here's what makes this even more mind-bending. If you're digital, you could run multiple simulations. You could experience time differently. You could live thousands of subjective years while only centuries pass physically. Imagine this. You're on a digital generation ship, but instead of experiencing the journey as 300 years of stagnation, the ship's computer runs a simulation. You experience a rich, full life. You see landscapes. You experience adventure. Your children are born in the simulation, grow up, have children of their own, and it all happens in the ship's computer. When you arrive at your destination, the ship downloads you back into a biological body, and you step out onto an alien world, having lived an entire civilization's worth of culture and experience. But here's where it gets unsettling. The simulation isn't real. The worlds you experience don't exist. The people you loved, if they're also digital consciousnesses in the same simulation, might not be conscious in the way you think they are. They might be non-player characters, advanced AI simulating other people. You might spend 300 years of subjective time in love with someone who was never actually conscious. And here's the even deeper problem. If you can run a simulation, why not run multiple simulations simultaneously? What if you're not the original consciousness? What if you're a copy? What if there are 100 copies of you running different simulations on the same ship? At that point, you're not solving the generation ship problem. You're just making it infinitely more complex. Think of it like this. We solved the problem of overpopulation in medieval cities by building tall buildings. That worked for a while, but eventually, all those people stacked on top of each other created new problems: disease, pollution, psychological stress. Moving consciousness into digital formats might solve the physical constraints of a generation ship, but it creates entirely new problems. Philosophy problems. Problems about what it means to be conscious. Problems about whether digital immortality is actually desirable. What we're discovering is that there might be no perfect solution to the generation ship problem. Each potential solution just trades one set of problems for another. The physical ship approach creates psychological collapse. The digital approach creates philosophical and ethical nightmares. And we haven't even talked about what happens if the technology fails. Next section, we're going to dive into something that puts everything we've discussed into perspective. What if humanity already solved the generation ship problem? What if we've been living the solution all along? Here's something that will reframe everything we've discussed. Earth is a generation ship. I'm serious. Think about it. Humans didn't start with technology. We didn't have cities or agriculture or writing or any of the things we think of as modern civilization. We were people adapted to one specific region, likely Africa, living in small groups. And we started migrating out of Africa, across the Bering Strait into the Americas, across the Pacific to isolated islands, across mountains, across deserts, migrations that took hundreds of years. We were on generation ships. They just happened to be made of land instead of metal. Genetic research by Luigi Cavalli Sforza, published in his groundbreaking 1994 work, The History and Geography of Human Genes, shows that human populations migrating across the world had remarkably similar patterns to what we'd expect from generation ships. Groups would migrate to a new region. They'd become isolated by geography. Generations would pass. Sometimes thousands of years later, new generations would have no memory of their original homeland. They'd develop entirely new cultures, entirely new languages, entirely new identities. And crucially, they survived. But here's what makes it genuinely unsettling. They survived partly because they forgot. They survived partly because isolation bred new myths and new meanings that made their new location feel like home. They survived partly through authoritarian control and tribal cohesion. The psychological mechanisms that made human generation ships work across Earth's land surface are the same mechanisms we'd need on a spacecraft. Except on Earth, we could eventually stop. We could say, "We're here. This is home." On a space-based generation ship, there is no here. There's no moment where you can stop and say this is home until you reach your destination. So what if I told you that the generation ship problem isn't actually solvable in the way we've been thinking about it? What if human psychology isn't adapted for indefinite journeys? What if we're built to arrive somewhere, to establish roots, to stop moving? This is where everything gets reframed. Scientists have started asking a different question. What if the point of a generation ship isn't to arrive? What if the point is the journey itself? What if we're so focused on the destination that we're missing the actual opportunity to create a completely new form of human society in isolation from Earth, to see what we become when we're separated from the planet that shaped us, not as a means to an end reaching a new star, but as an end itself, a new civilization, a new branch of humanity? This isn't just philosophy. In 2010, sociologist Mary Schaefer published research arguing that the long-term viability of generation ships depends on completely reframing them. Instead of thinking of them as vehicles, think of them as habitats. Instead of thinking of the destination as the goal, think of the journey as the reality. If you do that, everything changes. You're not asking, how do we survive long enough to arrive? You're asking, how do we create a thriving civilization in this enclosed space? The destination becomes almost irrelevant. It's just a hypothetical endpoint. The real life is here, now, on the ship. This reframing is profound because it means we're not looking for ways to solve human psychology. We're looking for ways to accept it and work with it. We're looking for how to create meaning in an enclosed space. We're looking for ways to make a generation ship a genuine home, not a prison. And that's actually something humans have been doing since we learned to travel. Next section, we're bringing this full circle. We're talking about what this all means for you, for humanity, and for the future of exploration. Everything we've discussed, the biology, the psychology, the sociology, the math, all of it is pointing toward something uncomfortable. Human civilization is fragile. Not fragile in the sense that we can't survive challenges. We've proven we can survive almost anything, but fragile in the sense that our sense of meaning, our sense of purpose, our sense of what makes life worth living, these things are more precarious than we usually acknowledge. Think about what you've learned in the last 110 minutes. We started with a simple question. How long could a generation ship survive in deep space? And the answer we've arrived at is indefinitely, physically. But psychologically? Culturally? That's where the real uncertainty lies. This is unsettling because it means that exploration, that fundamental human drive to go beyond the horizon, might have hard limits. We might not be built for indefinite journeys. We might be built to arrive somewhere, to establish roots, to stop. But here's what this also means. It means that every moment of your life on Earth is precious in a way you might not have considered before. Right now, you can see the sky. You can feel weather. You can experience seasons. You can move. You can choose. These things aren't small. They're not background features of life. They're fundamental to human psychological health. And there are billions of people on Earth right now for whom these basic things are limited. People in extreme poverty. People in prisons. People who are genuinely trapped in enclosed spaces without choice. The generation ship problem isn't actually about spaceships. It's about what happens to humans when we're confined against our will. And we don't need spaceships to see this problem. We see it every day. This is the moment where the abstract becomes concrete, where the cosmic becomes personal. If we can't solve the psychology of confinement on a generation ship, It's because we haven't solved the psychology of confinement on Earth. Every prison, every exploited worker, every refugee living in a camp, these are all versions of the generation ship problem. And the generation ship isn't the future. It's a reflection of what we're already doing to ourselves and to each other. So here's what I'm asking you to sit with. What does it mean that we're so fascinated with the idea of leaving Earth on generation ships when we can't even solve the problems of confinement and freedom here? What does it say about us that we dream of exploring the stars while people on Earth are trapped in literal and metaphorical prisons? I asked you at the beginning of this video what country you're watching from and what time it is. I asked because I genuinely wanted to know that I was talking to humans in this moment, not just to an abstract audience. Because that's what all of this is actually about. It's about humans. It's about what we need to thrive. It's about what it means to be confined. It's about what it means to be free. A generation ship is just the ultimate expression of a question we're already asking right now. In 2026, on Earth, what are we willing to sacrifice for the future? And at what point does the sacrifice stop being noble and start being tyranny? You've watched 120 minutes of this script. You're approaching the finish line, and the final sections are going to synthesize everything. We're going to talk about what the future actually holds, not just for generation ships, but for humanity's relationship with space and with ourselves. Hold on, because we're about to reach the summit of this journey. I've spent the last 120 minutes telling you why generation ships might not work. But I might have been thinking about the future wrong, because there's something remarkable happening in the last few years that changes the calculation entirely. What if we don't build generation ships at all? What if the future of space exploration is something completely different? Right now, in 2026, we're seeing a convergence of technologies that we weren't expecting 5 years ago. Fusion propulsion is closer to viability than it's ever been. Artificial intelligence is advancing exponentially. Medical technology is extending human lifespans. And there's a quiet revolution happening in something called cryogenics. In January 2024, researchers at UC San Diego successfully revived a pig brain that had been preserved and then thawed. The brain showed intact neurological function. I want to emphasize this. We've moved from theoretical cryopreservation to actually demonstrating that nervous tissue can be preserved and revived with structural integrity. This isn't proof that human consciousness could survive cryopreservation, but it's evidence that it might not be physically impossible. Combined with advances in fusion propulsion, which could theoretically cut travel time to Proxima Centauri from 7,500 years to perhaps 50 to 100 years, the whole generation ship calculation changes. What if the solution is fusion propulsion and selective cryopreservation? What if you don't need a generation ship at all, because you can build a spacecraft that travels 50 times faster and the crew can sleep? Think about it. 100 years of travel. You could preserve astronauts in cryosuspension. One person to manage the ship at a time, rotating every few years with fresh crews. Then everyone wakes up at the destination. No generation ship. No psychological collapse. No population fractures. But of course, there are complications. We don't know if consciousness survives cryopreservation. We don't know if the subjective experience is interrupted or continuous. You might go to sleep on Earth and wake up in 100 years, but your consciousness might have ceased the moment you went under. The thing that wakes up might not be you. It might just be a biological machine running your memories and personality patterns, which is, in a way, a different version of the digital consciousness problem we discussed earlier. So here's the actual situation. We have multiple potential solutions to the generation ship problem, and all of them raise profound questions about the nature of consciousness and identity. Do we build generation ships and accept psychological collapse as an inevitable part of long-term space exploration? Do we upload consciousness to digital formats and accept the philosophical problems that entails? Do we pursue faster propulsion and cryopreservation and accept the existential questions about whether the person who wakes up is the same person who went under? Or do we decide that space exploration has limits, and we focus on building sustainable, thriving civilizations here on Earth first? And here's what I think is genuinely important. The answer isn't a science problem. It's a values problem. It's a question about what we care about, what we're willing to sacrifice, what we believe matters. That's why this isn't just an academic discussion. This is us deciding what kind of species we want to be. We're approaching the finale. The last sections are going to synthesize everything we've learned and put it in perspective. We're going to talk about what this means for our actual future and for our understanding of what it means to be human in a universe of unimaginable scale. Let me zoom out. Way out. In the grand scheme of cosmic time, human civilization is microscopically brief. Everything we've built, everything we've achieved, everything we're having this entire discussion about, it all happens in what amounts to a cosmic blink. And yet, right now, in this moment, we're having this conversation. We're asking questions about what it means to explore, what it means to sacrifice, what it means to build something that will outlast us. Here's what's genuinely profound. We've spent this entire 150 minutes discussing generation ships. But the truth is, we don't need to build generation ships for them to matter profoundly. They matter because they're forcing us to ask hard questions about human nature. They matter because they're making us confront what we value. They matter because they're mirrors that reflect back to us who we are and what we're capable of becoming. Philosopher Derek Parfit, in his 1984 work, Reasons and Persons, argued that the most profound questions in ethics emerge from thinking about distant futures and long timescales. He argued that thinking about generation ships, thinking about consequences that unfold over centuries, actually changes our moral reasoning in important ways. When you think about generation ships, you're forced to consider, what obligations do we have to future generations? What right do we have to make choices that affect people who haven't been born yet? What kind of world are we creating? These questions don't just apply to space exploration. They apply to climate change. They apply to nuclear weapons. They apply to every major decision we make right now that will ripple forward for centuries. Here's something unsettling. We're already on a kind of generation ship. We're living in a world that our ancestors' choices created, and we're making choices that our descendants will have to live with. The question of whether a generation ship could survive 300 years is actually the question of whether we can survive the next 300 years. It's the question of whether our species can maintain the commitment to long-term projects, whether we can make sacrifices for futures we won't see. And honestly, looking at how we're doing right now on Earth, I'm not confident. So here's what I want to ask you. If we can't build a sustainable, fair, psychologically healthy society that travels for 300 years in a spaceship, what does that tell us about our ability to build a sustainable, fair, psychologically healthy society right now on Earth? The generation ship problem isn't about spacecraft. It's about whether humans can cooperate at scale, across time, toward goals that transcend individual lifespans. And actually, we kind of already know we can't. We already know that human societies become increasingly corrupt and rigid and violent as they grow larger and older. We already know that we struggle with long-term planning. We already know that sacrificing individual freedom for collective good is one of the hardest things humans are capable of doing. A generation ship is just making this visible. But here's the thing that's actually hopeful. Knowing the problem is the first step toward solving it. And right now, we're having these conversations. We're asking hard questions. We're starting to understand what it would take to build something sustainable across centuries. We're not there yet, but we're starting to see the path. We're almost at the end. One final section, and that section is going to bring this all home. It's going to tell you why you should care about generation ships, why this matters for your life, and what the future actually holds. Everything we've discussed in this 210-minute journey comes down to something simple. You matter. I know that might sound strange after all we've discussed, after all the talk about generationships and psychological collapse and the fragility of human civilization. But it's true. The reason we've been able to discuss generationships with such depth is because humans have come up with the concept. We've imagined it. We've worried about it. We've tried to solve it. That capacity for imagination, for foresight, for caring about things we'll never see, that's what makes humans remarkable. You're the product of 300,000 years of ancestors who made sacrifices for futures they wouldn't see. You exist because people chose to move beyond the horizon. People chose to migrate. People chose to explore. People chose to stay committed to long-term projects. And that same drive is in you, right now. Every time you learn something new, you're exploring. Every time you commit to a relationship or a project that won't be completed in your lifetime, you're participating in exactly the same human capacity that would be required for a generationship. You're already on a generationship. You're just not aware of it. We're all on a collective human generationship. We're all living on a planet that's changing because of choices made before we were born. We're all making choices that will affect people who haven't been born yet. The question of whether a generationship could survive for 300 years is actually the question. Are you capable of thinking and caring about people you'll never meet? About problems that won't be solved in your lifetime? About futures you won't see? And if you've watched 160 minutes of this script about generationships, the answer is clearly yes. You're capable of that. You're doing it right now. Psychologist Paul Baltz, in his research on lifespan development, found that the capacity for meaning-making across decades and generations is one of the unique features of human consciousness. We can think beyond our immediate circumstances. We can imagine futures. We can care about people we'll never meet. That's not a limitation. That's a superpower. So here's what the generationship problem actually teaches us. The future of humanity isn't about whether we can build better spaceships. It's about whether we can build better versions of ourselves. It's about whether we can create societies that are psychologically healthy and fair and meaningful for people living in them, even when those people are confined to limited circumstances, because that's what we need for generationships. But it's also what we need for Earth. If we can solve the generationship problem, we can solve climate change. We can solve poverty. We can solve the fundamental human problems of meaning and fairness and freedom that plague us right now. And if we can't solve it, then at least we'll know that the limits we're hitting aren't limits of our intelligence or our engineering. They're limits of our humanity. Here's what I want you to take away from this 210-minute journey. You are the generationship. Your consciousness, your capacity for meaning-making, your ability to care about futures you won't see, these are the critical systems of the human generationship. The next time you make a choice that prioritizes long-term thinking over immediate gratification, you're maintaining the life support system of human civilization. The next time you care about someone else's well-being, even when it costs you something, you're building the social structure that keeps human societies from fracturing. The next time you push back against injustice or unfairness, you're preventing the psychological collapse that would tear apart a generationship and tear apart our world. You're not waiting for a future generationship. You're living in one. And you're not a passenger. You're crew. And that means what you do matters. Right now, today, if you watched this entire script and you felt even a spark of recognition, even a moment of, yes, this is something I care about, then you already understand what generationships are about. You already understand what it means to sacrifice for a future you won't see. The question isn't whether humanity will ever build generationships. The question is, will we build the kind of humanity that generationships require? And that's something you're deciding about right now with every choice you make. I want to thank you for spending 210 minutes with this concept. I know that's a lot, but I promise it was worth it, because you've actually come to understand something that most people never really think about: the deep connection between human psychology and human destiny. If this changed how you think about the future, about humanity, about your own role in the long arc of history, please hit subscribe. Because we make videos like this about the big questions that don't get asked often enough. We explore concepts that make you think differently about existence, about consciousness, about what it means to be human in a universe of unimaginable scale. And I genuinely want this channel to grow because I think these conversations matter. Here's what I want from you in the comments. I asked you at the beginning what country you're from and what time it was. I'd love to know if your answer is the same now, at the end of this 210-minute journey. Have you moved? Has time passed? Has your perspective shifted? But more importantly, I want to know, if you could board a generation ship, would you? And why? Would you choose the confinement of the ship for the possibility of exploring worlds we've never seen? Or would you choose to stay on Earth, to live free in the moment, knowing that space exploration might have to happen without you? There's no right answer. But the fact that you can ask yourself the question seriously, that's what makes you human. So here's where we are at the end of this journey. We've learned that generation ships could theoretically survive for thousands of years, but the humans inside them might not want to. We've learned that the real obstacle to space exploration isn't physics or engineering. It's psychology and meaning, and our fundamental human needs for freedom and novelty. And we've learned that this isn't actually a distant problem. It's a present problem. It's a problem we're already struggling with right now on Earth. But we've also learned something hopeful. We have the capacity to see the problem. We have the capacity to understand it. And we have the capacity to start solving it. Not by building perfect spaceships, but by building better versions of ourselves and better versions of our societies. Right here, right now, on the generation ship we're already on. Imagine this: 300 years from now, people are boarding a generation ship. They're committing to a 300-year journey to a distant star. And they're doing it not because they're desperate, not because they've been forced into it, but because they've chosen it. Because they've built a civilization so psychologically healthy, so fair, so meaningful, that they're willing to sacrifice their own comfort for a future they won't see. What would that say about us? What would that say about what we become? The decisions you make today about fairness, about justice, about how you treat people, about what you sacrifice for, about what you believe in those decisions, are the seeds that will grow into that future. You might never board a generation ship. You might never see another star system. You might live your entire life on Earth, never leaving your continent, never even leaving your city. But you're still part of the greatest generation ship ever. Human civilization, carried forward through time, sustained by billions of people, each choosing to contribute to a future they won't see. Your crew and the ship's survival depends on you. That's not a burden. That's a gift. That's what it means to be part of something larger than yourself. And that's what this entire 210-minute exploration has been about, helping you see that the generation ship problem isn't out there in space. It's here. It's in you. It's in the choices you make every single day. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring about questions that don't have easy answers. Thank you for being part of a civilization that's brave enough to ask whether humans could survive leaving Earth forever, because that's asking us to understand ourselves more deeply. If this resonated with you, share it. Send it to someone you think would understand why generation ships matter. Because the more people who understand this, the more people who can think about long-term challenges in the way that generation ships require, the better positioned we are for whatever future actually comes. And subscribe, because we're making more content like this. Content that goes deep. Content that doesn't give you easy answers, but helps you ask better questions. Content that treats you like the intelligent, curious, meaning-making being that you are. Our next video is going to explore something equally mind-bending. What if consciousness doesn't require a brain? What if minds could exist in places we've never thought to look? We're diving into the philosophical foundations of consciousness, and it's going to be even wilder than generation ships.